Something in you has been waiting, not planning, waiting. For the past 4 months, every decision that felt almost ready kept going quiet before you made it. You'd reach the edge and stop. The ground didn't feel right. Tonight is different. At 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time on March 10th, Jupiter stations direct at 15 degrees Cancer. It has been moving backward since November 7th, 2025, 123 days of inward motion through the sign that governs home, belonging, and the emotional bedrock underneath everything else you're building. Tonight, it stops. It turns. This does not happen again, not in Cancer, for another 12 years. Here is what most people miss about this station. The last time Jupiter turned direct in Cancer was March 2014. That spring, a plane disappeared over the Indian Ocean and was never found. The map of Europe changed in a week. And quietly, without headlines, millions of people made the first real decision of their adult lives that came from choice, not from crisis. The pattern repeats. It always does. In the next few minutes, you'll discover 3 things. First, why Jupiter in Cancer doesn't expand what you want. It expands what you're willing to protect. Second, what the Venus-Pluto signal forming at 2:52 a.m. means for anything you've been trying to hold together. Third, what the moment at 11:30 p.m. tonight is actually asking of you, and why it lands differently than anything you've set before. The ground cleared. You're standing on it. Now comes the question of what you plant. You woke up before the alarm, maybe before light, not from a dream, not from noise, just the fact of being awake at a time when nothing required it, and a specific quality of silence that came with it, not restful, not anxious exactly. Something held, a weight in the chest without origin. You lay there. The first thought arrived and you didn't know where it came from. The coffee went cold before you touched it. You know which decisions you mean. The ones that kept getting close. Career. Where you live. A relationship. A project. Something you've been building or leaving or circling for months. Each time, the shape of the choice became clear. The reasoning was solid. Then, something would shift. Not your nerve, not your information, but the ground underneath. You'd press your weight onto it and it would give. The timing felt wrong. You'd step back. Again. That is not a failure of nerve. Jupiter entered retrograde on November 11th, 2025. For 119 days, it moved backward through Cancer, the one sign in the zodiac where its natural function moves inward rather than outward. Cancer is Jupiter's sign of exaltation, the position in the zodiac where the planet operates at full strength. In Cancer, it does not expand territory, it expands foundation. And for 119 days, it has been running one quiet, systematic audit. What are you actually willing to protect? Not what you want. What you will defend at real cost without a guarantee of return. The decision stopped at the edge because that audit wasn't finished. It finished this morning. There is also something else, and it is documented, not interpreted. A 2000 study published in JAMA, led by Eve Van Cotter at the University of Chicago, measured what happens to sleep architecture and hormone levels after 50. Evening cortisol rises by 19.3 nanomoles per liter per decade. Sleep fragments, REM stages shrink to roughly half their young adult levels. And during the pre-dawn hours, those 3 a.m. awakenings without identifiable cause, the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex are processing emotional memory. Unresolved narratives receive more time in the dark. That awakening is not anxiety. It is the brain completing work it couldn't finish while you were moving. You've been doing that work for 4 months. Jupiter sits approximately 700 million kilometers from Earth right now. At that distance, its apparent motion against the fixed stars becomes undetectable for a window of 48 to 72 hours on either side of the exact station. Since yesterday morning, the planet has held a position, 15 degrees, 5 minutes Cancer, not drifting, not progressing, holding, mathematically precise, astronomically inevitable. While you were trying to name what you were feeling this morning, something 700 million kilometers away was doing the same. Holding still. Before the turn. But before you name what you're holding, understand where it comes from. What happens tonight at 15 degrees Cancer has happened before, 3 times within your lifetime, and the pattern it leaves behind is not coincidence. Jupiter completes one orbit around the Sun in 11.86 years. That is not a symbolic number. It is orbital mechanics, the time it takes to return to the same degree of the same sign. Cancer is the sign of exaltation for Jupiter in classical tradition, the position where its natural function operates without resistance. In Cancer, Jupiter does not expand ambition or belief. It expands what you consider foundational, home, belonging, the ground from which everything else is built. The geometry repeats on a fixed schedule. Every 12 years, 3 times within your lifetime, Jupiter has turned direct in Cancer. 3 times, the same sequence followed. Something was cleared. Then, quiet. Then, the first real choice after the clearing. 1989. The Berlin Wall came down on November 9th. Millions of people faced a question they had never been permitted to answer. Where do you want to live? Not what is allowed. What do you choose? Jupiter was direct in Cancer. The space was real, and its weight, the specific heaviness of genuine choice after decades of forced waiting, was something they had never been prepared to carry. Not because the sky caused it, but because the conditions that produce the first real choice after cleared ground, in people, in nations, in rooms, tend to arrive together. 2002. Jupiter entered Cancer on July 13, 2001. 8 weeks later, September 11th. An entire country spent months redefining 3 words: home, safety, what is worth protecting. Jupiter turned direct in Cancer in February 2002. In millions of private rooms, the same question formed: what am I building? Not from fear, but from what I actually choose. 2014. Jupiter turned direct in Cancer in early March. On March 8th, flight MH370 disappeared over the Indian Ocean, and the world waited for weeks with no answer. That same spring, the map of Europe changed in 7 days. And beneath those headlines, for the first time since the 2008 collapse, millions of people made the first genuinely voluntary decision of their adult lives. Changed careers, left relationships that had survived crisis but never become alive. Moved, not because the sky caused it, but because the conditions that produce the first real choice after cleared ground tend to arrive together. This was documented long before astrology became a genre. The Emil Apine tablets, compiled around 687 BCE, based on systematic observations dating to the 12th century BCE, record the movements and stations of Sag-Mi-Gar, the planet identified with Marduk, guardian of the city, the one whose forward motion signaled protection rather than withdrawal. The Babylonians marked planetary stations with a specific notation. Days when forward motion halted were recorded as moments the guardian faced forward again. Not prophecy. Observation. They kept records long enough to predict these moments, centuries in advance. The same precision that produced those clay tablets produced tonight's calculation. Right now, Jupiter stands motionless at 15 degrees 5 minutes Cancer. This cycle closes when Jupiter leaves Cancer on June 30, 2026. It will not return to this sign until 2037. Every one of those moments, 1989, 2002, 2014, had one thing in common. Something had already been cleared before the choice arrived. Tonight, the clearing happened 3 days ago, but there was a second signal, one that formed while you were asleep, at 2:52 this morning, and almost nobody noticed it. At 2:52 a.m. Eastern Time on March 10th, Venus made exact contact with Pluto. Most people were asleep. The signal completed without announcement. Over the 3 days before it, Venus moved through a compressed sequence of contacts. On March 7th, it conjuncted Neptune in Aries, the aspect that surfaces what is imagined rather than real. The projection. The version of something you've been telling yourself instead of seeing. On March 8th, it conjuncted Saturn. No softening, no adjustment. Saturn marks the line between what holds and what doesn't, between what is actual and what is merely convenient. Whatever remained after both of those is real. Not comfortable. Real. At 2:52 a.m., Venus at 4 degrees 46 minutes, Aries formed an exact sextile to Pluto at 4 degrees 46 minutes Aquarius, precise to the arc minute. A sextile is a 60-degree arc, an aspect of opportunity rather than pressure. The first harmonic contact in 3 days of hard transits, but the planet it reached was Pluto. This is not a soft signal. Pluto in Aquarius does not offer restoration. It does not point back toward what was lost or toward a better version of what you had. Pluto transforms through structure, through what is already irreversible, through what can no longer be walked back. Venus in Aries does not reach backward either. It reaches toward something that hasn't existed yet. The sextile between them is not the relief of return. It is the first open channel between what survived the testing and what has not yet been built. What you were holding together this past week, in a relationship, in how you work, in how you see yourself, if it is still standing this morning, it passed through Neptune and Saturn both. It is now in contact with transformation, not recovery, a different shape. A woman in her 50s woke in a room in Cincinnati at 2:51 a.m., no alarm, no sound. She turned onto her back and felt something she couldn't name. Not fear, not grief, but a specific loosening, like pressure she hadn't registered until it shifted. She was asleep again by 3:10. She didn't know what Venus was doing at that moment. In East London, a man got up for a glass of water at 3:47 a.m. local time, 2:47 a.m. Eastern. Stood at the window. The street was empty. He went back to bed. We don't know if the body registers this, but we know the body was not still. Before you move into tonight, one thing, not a list. One thing that did not break this week when it could have. In a relationship, in your work, in the way you regard yourself. Name it or write it. What you're about to understand about tonight's station changes everything about how you read what happened this morning. That signal completed at 2:52 a.m. Eastern. There are now hours, not many, until 11:30 p.m. Most people assume Jupiter expands what you want. That's not what it does in Cancer. It expands what you are willing to protect. And for someone who has been through what you've been through, those two things are not the same list. Everyone knows what Jupiter does: expansion, abundance, the planet of more. For 12 years, that framing has been correct enough. Jupiter in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Capricorn, Jupiter in Pisces, each time pointing outward, upward toward territory not yet claimed. In Cancer, the direction reverses. Cancer rules the 4th house in classical astrology: roots, origin, the thing underneath the thing, the floor, not the ceiling. Jupiter in Cancer does not expand your horizon, it expands your foundation, and the distinction matters more than most people want it to. Here is what Jupiter in Cancer actually expands: what you consider home, not the address, the system. Any structure, a relationship, a way of working, a version of yourself in which you feel entitled to exist without proving that you belong, without performing competence or earning presence or making yourself small enough to be tolerated. The places and people and internal arrangements where you are simply allowed to be. You can want dozens of things. That list is long for most people. But the list of what you will actively defend, at real cost without certainty of outcome, even when the defense is exhausting, that list is shorter, much shorter. And Jupiter in Cancer, for 119 days, has been quietly separating the two. The decisions that stopped at the edge didn't stop because you didn't know what you wanted. They stopped because the answer you kept arriving at wasn't on your second list. You found it and didn't like it. Or you found it and knew what defending it would cost. Either way, you stepped back. The audit continued. That is not failure. That is the process. There is parallel evidence in neuroscience, and it does not require interpretation. Laura Carstenson's research at Stanford, the socio-emotional selectivity theory, developed over 2 decades, documented a consistent pattern in adults over 50. The brain begins to allocate attention preferentially to emotionally meaningful material, not broadly to everything new or interesting, specifically to what is worth preserving. The neural architecture reorganizes around a single question: what matters enough to keep? Not conservatism, not fear of the new, a biological prioritization that mirrors exactly what Jupiter in Cancer asks astrologically. Two systems, one neurological, one astronomical, running the same audit simultaneously. Not through mysticism, through the convergence of natural cycles that operate on different scales but arrive at the same question at the same time. For some signs, tonight's station moves directly through the fourth house, through what you call home in the most literal sense. For others, it activates the 8th or the 12th, what is shared, what is hidden, what has been inherited and not yet examined. Where this lands in your specific chart determines what, exactly, is being expanded tonight. That part comes next. But first, the moment itself. You now have less than a handful of hours, not to decide. You've been deciding for 119 days. To write, one sentence, from cleared ground, not from fear. The protocol is simple. The moment it lands in is not. At 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time on March 10th, the angular velocity of Jupiter, as measured from Earth, crosses zero. This is not metaphor. It is orbital calculation, the point at which apparent retrograde motion ends and direct motion begins, expressed as a precise moment in time. The same mathematics that allowed Babylonian astronomers to predict planetary stations centuries in advance, from clay tablet records alone, produces tonight's number. Nothing will look different at 11:30 p.m. Jupiter will not brighten, the sky will not shift. There will be no sensation of arrival, no feeling that something large has moved. If you are outside and you look up, the planet will appear exactly as it did yesterday. The station is not visible. It is a change in direction, not in appearance. What changes is the vector, the sign of the motion. That is, in fact, the point. Most of the decisions you've made under pressure in your life were made by the part of the brain that moves fastest, what Kahneman mapped as System 1, rapid, pattern-matching, loss-averse. It selects for the least threatening option, not the most true one. It is very good at survival. It is less good at authorship. For 119 days, retrograde pressure has worn the fast system down, not taught it, exhausted it. What remains when System 1 runs out of defensive options is slower, quieter, and more honest. Tonight, for the first time in 4 months, there's enough silence for it to be heard. One sheet of paper, a pen. Between 11 p.m. and 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time, the window of the station, one sentence, written by hand, not typed, beginning with these words: "From this point, I choose to grow, and then whatever is true." Not a list, not a plan, not a goal with metrics, one sentence that ends with a period. You will know the difference between a sentence written from the chest and one written from the stomach. The stomach produces sentences about avoiding loss. The chest produces sentences about what you are actually willing to build. If the first draft comes from the stomach, and it might, set it aside and wait. The sentence from the chest is slower. It arrives like a fact, not a hope. In San Francisco, it will be 8:30 p.m. when the station completes. In London, 4:30 a.m. on March 11th. In Berlin, 5:30. The moment is simultaneous. The experience is not. Each person sits in their own light, their own quiet, their own version of this same held breath. Thousands of people will write one sentence tonight, each one different. None of them heard by the others, but written in the same window of time, from the same cleared ground, toward the same open space. Not a ritual, not a ceremony, a single act of authorship over what you plant next. You wrote it, or you're about to. Either way, the open space is now yours. Not in the sense of ownership, in the sense of responsibility. What remains after a station like this is not relief. It's the weight of a question that can no longer be left unanswered. And that weight has a shape, it always does. The sentence is written, or the paper is still blank and you're sitting with it. Both are part of the same moment. What you expected, if you expected anything, was probably relief. The lift that comes when a long thing ends. That is not what this is. The Berlin Wall came down on November 9th, 1989. The first accounts from people who crossed described not euphoria but disorientation. An open border is not a destination. It is a question about what you do with the space. The relief lasted hours. The wait that followed lasted years. not because something went wrong, because freedom from a constraint is not the same as knowing what to build in its absence. February 2002. Jupiter turned direct in Cancer 7 months after September. The country had spent those months redefining what safety meant. What followed the shift wasn't peace. It was the first full encounter with the size of the choice. More decisions were made in America in 2002 than in any year since 1945. More decisions means more weight, more authorship, more outcomes that are yours to carry. Spring 2014. Those who made genuine choices that season, who left, moved, changed, remember the weeks after not as lightness but as exposure. The thing a bad situation had protected them from, even while damaging them, was the full responsibility of the open space. Not because the sky made it harder, because cleared ground asks a clearer question, and a clearer question produces a more honest answer. Jupiter is now moving forward. From 15 degrees 5 minutes, Cancer, it will travel to 25 degrees 9 minutes. Cancer, the degree where it first slowed into retrograde shadow last August. That path takes roughly 15 weeks, ending when Jupiter leaves Cancer entirely on June 30th, 2026. Every degree it covers now is grounded audited during the retrograde, walked forward for the first time. Not new territory. The same ground, in a different direction. On March 20th, 10 days from tonight, Mercury stations direct in Pisces and the Sun enters Aries, the spring equinox. What Jupiter opened in feeling tonight, Mercury will return to language. What was asked in silence will begin, slowly, to find words. These are not separate events. They are the next positions in the same sequence. The cycle does not pause between them. Jupiter's station completes at 11:30 p.m. No ceremony. Just the moment a planet holds still after 123 days of backward motion, and then, silently, begins to move forward. The degree is 15 Cancer. Nothing looks different. But something underneath has shifted direction. What remains isn't relief. It's the weight of an open space, the kind that arrives after the question has been asked long enough, and all that's left is what you do with the silence. What comes next in this sequence is not separate from tonight. Subscribe and stay close. Turn on notifications. The next part of this cycle does not pause for you to catch up.